Welcome back for another installment of Let's Get Tenure. And this episode, instead of playing the game, we're just going to be talking about the previous video and kind of giving a data analysis, uh, trying to summarize what happened in a quick amount of time, and then talk about some of the strategies that we could use to hopefully overcome the challenges. So in the beginning, it was really nice to watch the city go, and there weren't a lot of challenges for the first maybe 10 or 12 minutes of the video. Uh, what happened though is that I was not importing nearly enough firewood, so my firewood was depleting, and you can see it at some point that I go in and I set trading posts to purchase more firewood, and I think warm coats as well. So I went to the trading banks. I took some warm coats and some firewood that I had stockpiled. I dispersed that, and the problem solved itself. But what also ended up happening is that my traders became overwhelmed as they were purchasing more firewood and not replenishing the alcohol quick enough to be able to purchase more fruit, which therefore, I couldn't be producing more ale. So if you see in the video right now, for example, in the clip, all of the brewers on screen are working. And if you fast forward towards the end of the clip, you can see that none of the brewers are working. So, trades were still going on, but what was the problem is there wasn't enough alcohol in the trading post to purchase more fruit, and the distribution, if you will, of the total food got out of whack. So, it's not the end of the world. Uh, and let's go into the game real quick and just look at some of the other graphs that we have. Right, so with population, over the last 20 years, we've really had a nice uh, leveled out population. It grows, it shrinks. If we go back to 50 years, you can see this has been a continued trend. And then back to 100 years, there's actually been three occurrences of this. The one in the middle was more pronounced because here on the left, we had built the bank. And when we built the bank, we built some additional houses. So right here at the valley, this first valley, we had actually built a number of new houses that contributed to a population spike. So it didn't bottom out as greatly as it did in this example. And then, if you look into the modern trend, we're hitting the bottom, it seems, right about now. So it may continue to drop a little bit, but for the most part, I don't anticipate to have a population problem. At the bottom of the really big valley here, I still had enough general laborers. I think I had something like 20 or 40. So I didn't have a problem replacing traders and brewers. So that's the good news. The bad news is this, and food has been drastically on the decline. If you look at this from a 100-year window, it becomes a lot more dramatic. Uh, in a 1-year window, it's steadily going down at this point. And again, you can see that there's no alcohol, so trades are very limited. We're not purchasing as much as we used to be purchasing, largely because we're purchasing wood and other commodities. So looking back here at the population graph, I'm sorry, the production information, uh, we've now been completely automated for 25 years, and we have produced 530,000 ale. Now, if you look at this in terms of the last year, it's 7,800 ale. So, again, that's giving you a really good idea that ale production has just steadily decreased. And I was a little surprised at the reason for it. Although, I mean, I learned something, everybody learns as they play. I don't think there's anything really worthwhile. The tools are going up, so we're successfully auto trading tools. Clothing is also kind of stabilizing. Still watching that closely. Firewood has been a little erratic, and I think there's one or two things that I can do to kind of stabilize that. But other than that, the health has started to decline a little bit. I think this is probably due to a lack of diversity in diet. So if we go to the inventory tab and we look at, we go to look by, sort by quantity, you can see that we have tons of vegetables and not a lot of anything else. So I assume that that is having a negative health effect on the population. One thing that I did do, which I found to be quite useful, um, was put in this Excel window here. So I just took the raw values from some screen caps I had taken at year 100 and at 120, and then started to look at the distribution of them across the total. So, a really good way of looking at this is I have 127,000 cabbage. That is 10% of all of this stuff. And the variance here is the difference between the distribution in year 120 and the distribution in year 100. So for example, with warm coats, in year 120 I have 2253. In year 100 I had 1116, so that's plus 267% between those two different distribution variances. Uh, Now it is worth noting with the warm coats and the firewood that I withdrew something from a bank, so these aren't necessarily good indicators of anything. But with herb, for example, or herbs, I should say, or I don't even know how to fucking say that word when it's not marijuana. Anyway, with herbs, I believe that is the correct one. Uh, you can see that we're positive 173%. So that's really good because we have been successfully auto trading for these. For steel tools, we have been successfully auto trading. We've gone up 1,000 in these 20 years. It's 148% gain. Uh, Berries are at a negative 15% variance between these 2 points. So in the year 100, I had 17,750 berries. And in the year 120, I had 8,200. So, this is the beginning of the negative variances. And this is kind of when you get into the food items, right? I mean, you can see logs and iron are down here, uh, wool and stuff like that. But predominantly speaking, the big negative 100, negative 99, these variances are all food items, which makes a lot of sense when you look at the fact that our food has been shrinking. So there wasn't a lot of information that this told me per se that was surprising. But when you start to kind of group these items, right, because you have uh, you have wheat and you have corn, and those are grains, and you have cherries and apples and berries and stuff like that, and those are fruit. So when you start to kind of total those up by the item type and looking at the same distributions and variances, things start to look a little bit more interesting. So for clothing and fuel, as we said, we took clothing out of the banks, we took fuel out of the banks. These are not necessarily that interesting. But again, with herbs and tools, those are positive variances. Uh, Textiles are essentially zero. It's still 3,900 to 3,900. The reason it's a positive 82% variance is because we have less things in turn 120. But then, we can start to see with the food items what our rank is. So with vegetables, we're gaining vegetables, not only, in terms of distribution. So, that's an interesting fact because if you go over to the trading posts and look at the auto trades, the auto trade priority is fruit, vegetable, and grain. So, you know, one of the consequences, obviously, of brewing is that you're consuming the fruit to create alcohol. Alcohol is being used to trade, and you're bringing new things in. So, this is kind of telling me something. It's telling me that I'm using fruit more quickly than I'm bringing fruit in, but it's also telling me that vegetables are becoming a much greater distribution of my total food. It's also telling me that, grains are becoming far less of a distribution, and grains are, right above meats in terms of that, in terms of that food priority, which is protein here. So again, this is kind of telling me that the auto traders are not able to purchase the grains and the meats necessarily that they could be, that are there for them to be purchasing because they don't have enough alcohol to make the purchase because they don't have enough fruit. Uh, would be a simple way of saying it. So here's some pie charts. I made them pie charts because someone once told me that pie charts are terrible, and yeah, that's why I like pie charts now. Uh, when we start to look at things, in a little bit more of a granular level, again, this is just our food. So now this is, the difference here is that these variances are a function of the sum of this. So we're adding in fuel. So the variances are product of what's in the total column. So what I wanted to do was break this down, and now I want to look at it just on a food basis. So, again, there's nothing really interesting here. It's still not necessarily telling me anything. Grains are actually looking not as bad as I thought a moment ago, which is telling me something actually, and it's telling me that the auto traders have enough alcohol to be purchasing vegetables, right? That's one of the things they're able to purchase, and it's the second priority. So that means that the auto traders are purchasing all of the fruit they can. They're purchasing all of the vegetables they can. They're purchasing most of the grain that they can, or at least some of the grain that they can, and then they're often not purchasing any protein at all. So in terms of, the ability to sell, how do I say this? In terms of the ability of the trading post to make a full purchase, to unload that purchase, then restock that trading post with alcohol, which assumes that there is even alcohol to restock them with, that cycle is falling short of allowing me to purchase protein, but it is allowing me to purchase some grain. So, that's starting to give me a much better look at ways that I might be able to optimize this and fix the problem. Uh, so next, I wanted to look at this on an individual food type. I wanted to see where the variance is specifically. Uh, in this case, roots, cabbage, pepper, squash, potato, mushroom. My variances are going up in all these things, which is great. We know that because, excuse me, we know that because uh, of what we just saw. But this is what starts to really stick out right here is with berries. And the reason it sticks out is that I am not producing ale with berries. And I'm not producing ale with berries because it is less efficient to convert berries into ale than it is with apple, cherry, peach, pear, and plum. So I enabled in the auto traders the ability to purchase berries when I disabled all my gatherers. And I did so with the thought that it would diversify the diet, and it would give the citizens a fruit source that was not being used for ale. Now, that worked really well in the beginning of the video, and you can just now see in that video that some of the taverns are being turned off. And so what occurred is the ships started to bring in fruit, and when I changed the trading post to purchase more wool, it threw the balance off, right? And when I really started to think about it, uh, when you're only purchasing 9,999 fruit, and fruit is only available from two of the five potential trading ships, to be purchasing a lot of berries is just greatly reducing the total number of theoretical fruit that you could be purchasing, with a limited number of trading posts. So you can see in terms, this is the food distribution by food type, and this is the how many items there are. So for example, with grain, if you are auto buying 9,999 grain, you can only get to that number with corn or wheat. That's it. With protein, and I didn't know this until today, the nuts all count as protein. So there are 9 different types of meat. So when you're saying auto trade meat, you're actually saying to auto trade, chestnuts and walnuts or whatever. Uh, with vegetables, there are 9. So with fruit, there's 6. 5 of them are good for making ale. So, what that's ultimately telling me is, if you're auto trading, if you're setting the trading ships to bring you berries, you might never get to 9,999 fruit of all the other types, because you might buy 9,000 of the berries. And even if you don't buy 9,000, even if you buy 2,000 of the berries, the mere existence of the berries on the list, I mean, they might only bring you berries and peaches. If you're having your food ship bring every single food item, they might only bring you berries and peaches, and they might only bring you a total of 4,000, which means you're essentially getting 2,000 because you enabled berries. And with protein, having learned that protein, or that the nuts count for protein, it never makes sense to tell a food ship to bring you mutton, sheep, chicken, or egg, ever. What you want to do is have them bring you stuff like chestnuts and buy 9,000 of them cheap. And I'm assuming, although I mean, I haven't looked at the numbers in the long term, but in terms of just diversifying the diet on the cheap, if meat is your lowest economic priority, it would seem much more, advantageous to be purchasing those types of food items in quantity, and then, not having to. So, you could set it to bring you like chestnuts is one item, and then, all 5 of the fruit items, and then maybe corn and 2 or 3 vegetables. But what you're doing by minimizing how many food items you're having each trading post bring in is maximizing the amount of brewable fruit that you can potentially use to make ale. So, that is the first and the biggest thing that I've learned, by looking at the data this way. And unfortunately, it's going to be a tedious, painful couple of years to go in and re-optimize most of the trading posts. There are quite a few of them, obviously. And then in the same breath, what I'll probably do is build a couple trading posts which are stocked with maybe berries, for example, or some of the other food items that I have a lot of. I think pumpkins is one. and trading those for raw fruit to, again, increase the amount of fruit that I have, which will allow my brewers to get back to work. Once they're back to work, the trading posts can be restocked. Once they're restocked, they continue to purchase a surplus of food as opposed to, slowly starving to death. So that's it for this video. I am actually putting a link to that Excel data file in the file video description if anybody wants to play with it. All you have to do is paste in the values for any two dates, and it should spit out everything else for you. That's it. You guys have a great night.